And so, again, I want to welcome everybody to today's presentation on Empower NextGen Leaders to Master Tomorrow's Challenges, because they include today's challenges and some massively new ones for tomorrow. Think about all the things about terrorism, IT, hacking that you didn't have to deal with many, many years ago. So, with that, let's begin. I'm going to deal with really three major issues today for you. The first one are what are some of the challenges people are handling, traditional ones, and some of the new ones. What are the attributes you want to see in your leaders to be able to handle them? And we'll go into that in depth by looking at issues and these are skills, and some of the role models who are there. An example, Martin Luther King being one who's very authentic, okay, and holds himself accountable and made such a difference and changed the world. And then finally, we're going to talk about some techniques you can use to cultivate next gen leaders, which is critical. Many of the smartest programs are out recruiting them and then providing the kinds of services necessary to fast track them, because the best way to expand is with an experienced leader, even if it's a next gen leader who's going to learn a little bit on the job. Actually, from our approach of continuous learning, we're all learning on the job. So let's start with just a simple definition that gets us started. First one is, what is a leader and a manager? I run into this all the time when I'm working with my CEOs, who are right now focusing with me on our 2016 plans. I know it's only the middle of December, but one of our priorities here at the Presentation Excellence Group is always to get a jump on priorities so that come January 1, we're able to hit the road running, etc. The difference between a leader and a manager is in terms of how they're focused. A leader decides what's the right thing to do, chooses a direction for the company, and in doing that has to figure out how to articulate it. And that means creating a vision. Where does he or she want to see the company 10, 15 years from now or longer? How are they going to change the world as a result? And one last way of phrasing that is, somebody once said, if you could pick a headline for your company 20 years from now, what would it look like? And then the second part is the mission. All your wonderful employees, freelancers, strategic partners, shareholders that are involved with what you're doing, what are they getting up every day to do? So if you're at Starbucks, as we've said very often, the mission is to make sure that you've helped every customer launch a really wonderful day full of energy, through obviously the caffeine of Starbucks coffee, but also through a friendly face that's providing with you with what you're looking for, and an atmosphere that's conducive to it. The second thing that a leader needs to do is focus on setting the tone, which is the values and the culture. And culture is very important. As we mentioned in last week's webinar, culture, according to Peter Drucker, eats strategy for breakfast, meaning you can have all the plans for a great strategy, but if you don't invoke a culture that reinforces it, it's not going to matter. And that culture really consists of two things: values and behaviors. And so what you want to do is set both of them up right away. What is it we're looking for our people? So for example, I've given you a value earlier today already: continuous learning. So when I work now on employee review systems for many of our companies, what we're looking at is not the gotcha problem of, you didn't do something right, and therefore we can hold you accountable in a negative way. The goal is to help you become more strategically, better strategic performance, more culturally aligned, and a better leader, so that you will produce more for yourself and feel good about your job, for the team, and for the company as a whole. In organizing all of these pieces, it's the manager who gets the things done. So it's, the leaders ask the question, what should we do? And essentially the manager's figuring out, how do we do it so that it gets done? The focus is on implementation and execution. And so most leader managers are both. Okay, they set leadership, and they are also focusing on how to manage their team, their time, etc. Managers may not be leaders in that sense. They may be just implementing what's happening. Why is that important? Because we grew up, most of us, with the concept of a hierarchical organization, a vertical organization, where the top person is figuring out what the company should do, vision and mission, and setting the strategy, and then delegating it down. And that could go down as many hierarchical steps in a ladder as you would want to have in a company. I do a lot of work on companies that are re-engineering themselves, and it's funny that almost everyone, the writer has said this company once had 9 layers of hierarchy from the top to the bottom. Incredible. The point is, leaders aren't at the top. In fact, the leaders are anywhere in a company. And so this diagram here is really to show you that basically you are yourself, you are leading down your subordinate, okay? But you're also managing up. And in that sense, you're leading up. You're helping your manager understand your needs and maybe how to help you meet them better, as well as to change how both of you are working in the group. In addition, you're moving to the side. You're working with the peers that are part of your team. You're working with the peers that may be in a different company, in a different organization, etc. And it's all part of the same responsibility of leading everywhere. Again, it's asking what's the right thing for us to do. If you were part of our presentation on commanding strategies a week ago, you noticed that I spent some time going into organizational structure and made the point that the new models of organizations, the network model, the network team model, and even a holacracy model, all of these are thinking of flatter organizations or flat completely organizations, and therefore the leader really is embedded, as this diagram says, in the middle of everything and helping everybody go. And that's really very important. So, what's the challenge then that every leader has to really think about? And that is the person that they're leading has to answer a question: why should I follow you? That's really the key question. And so that's what we're trying to get at, because if we're training people to be great leaders, they have the skills of what to do, how to do it, when to do it, why to do it. But to get people to follow, they've got to answer that final question about themselves. And so that's what we're going to focus in on. As I mentioned, much of this is traditional. Doesn't matter if you're doing accounting or investment banking or building technology of one sort or another. Much of this stuff in terms of leadership is the same. But what's really changing is the pace and the way in which it's happening. So, for example, once upon a time, it was easy to work with people who were all in your local geography. And because you're only working, for example, if you're a bakery, selling people who are local. Today's world is flat, meaning we can do business with people anywhere in the world. So we've got billions of people that could be buying and selling our products with whom we are also using them as suppliers. Think about all the outsourcing to the apparel industry in America that's being done in Asia. It's a flat world. It's going there. Even if I'm that baker and I'm producing products, those could be packaged and sold anywhere in the world and could be going there. That complexity is how does, that adds a very important level of complexity because I can't see my end user. I might not see my distributor. I'm working on different time zones. I have different pay levels at which people are working. All kinds of things change, and that's part of the challenge, understanding those things that are not what I'm brought up to see. The second part is economic stagflations. I haven't heard actually yet. I believe it'll be later today that we will hear that the Fed Reserve is going to raise its rate, supposedly by about 1/4%. First time in 7 years that it's raising its interest rate. Clearly, the stagnation that we've had for the last 7 years has helped the country overcome where we were 7 years ago. But the other side of the coin is we're still having very slow growth, very slow inflation, etc. And part of that is the economics of this country, and part of it is security issues. Clearly, if you were in a position, in the let's say 1990s, in this world, there weren't as many different conflicts tying in everybody in the entire world. Um, the Soviet Union fell apart. There's an opportunity for people to look forward and think, my gosh, maybe we can have some really positive things happening. And we take a look today at ISIS, and we take a look at the other crises that are happening, whether it's immigrants, etc. It's all over the place. It's something. It's a perfect example is when 2001 happened, 9/11. All the buildings here in New York suddenly created security systems to get in. And so every time I went to a meeting for the first week, I was a minimum of 15 minutes late, even though I got there on time. And so now I had to figure out how to adjust it. Again, everyone has to adjust. The global power shifts are there. Again, rising nations like China 10 years ago and today are very different. And even today, China's growth is different than 2 years ago. Economic growth is slowing down. Different crises and issues are taking place internally, real estate, commercialization, etc. Things are shifting, and again, as a leader, you need to be aware of them because as you try to move forward, everything makes a difference. Today, for example, if you paid attention last week, we have the global environmental meeting to address global warmth. And what's really an important issue that's going to change the way countries focus on producing energy and changing some of the things so this planet becomes more sustainable. Demographics are changing. We've been in a world most of us grew up in which people coming into the workforce, they're coming in larger volumes than the people who are leaving the workforce, and there's always more of them coming because it's more of a kind of a pyramid, the top and the bottom in terms of the base being growing, and these people have more skills, have more energy, and they can grow, and that's changing. The fastest growing group right now is the top of the baby boomers. 80 million people over the age of 55 are there. I just heard a phenomenal statistic that in the year 2050, 22% of the United States, Germany, China, and other countries probably to the same extent like England will be over the age of 65. So there's a massive shift in terms of consumer products, in terms of work habits, workability, etc. And finally, we have a greater diversity than ever before, and that's a wonderful thing because diversity, as we paid attention to our program a couple of weeks ago, facilitates, I should say, innovation because people see things different ways, etc. So once again, there's so many different issues that leaders need to focus on in now that they didn't really focus on. So if we couldn't get it all right the first time around, now with all these new changes, it's even more complicated. And so the challenge is really to focus on how to handle this stuff as well as to address it directly. And handling it means understanding that it's now a virtual and global workforce. There are people working all over the place, and you need to adapt to that capability. So, you wake up in the United States, as I do in the morning, there's always a future market here in the United States, which is focusing on what's actually been happening in Europe or in Asia because the whole world is working together. There are companies that are totally virtual, and that's changed it. Think about the before most people worked for a company or employees, and now we have all of these companies like Uber, Airbnb, etc., where the assets, which might be people or places, aren't even owned by the company. And so it's totally changed. I have one member of my CEO group who really does have a 24/7 operation because what she's discovered is she needs to take care of people in Asia and in Europe throughout the day in terms of issues that come up in terms of handling it. She's handling high-end technology issues. And so while she does get to sleep, it's in between all of these different time zone needs. Second part is everything is instant. It's communication. Remember, you write one thing, whether it's a Twitter or an email, or Facebook, and immediately everybody knows what it is. It's an instant, but the bad part of that is not just information, but the bad part you have to make decisions quicker. And there's the ability to say, I'm going to read this later and come back and think it through and give you an answer is a little more difficult because you have to stop everything to be able to say that. But if you are a good leader, one of the best things is to recognize your strengths and weaknesses in terms of biorhythms and the ability to process information and work with it. So I sit with many of my CEOs, and I'll tell them instead of crashing a decision late in the afternoon when you know you're not working at peak, is demand that you're going to make that decision either earlier in the morning, so you get the information earlier, or you get the extra night to think it through and let your subconscious really analyze all of the variables that are affecting and being able to think of what it's about. The third part that you want to focus in on is this issue about innovation. Clearly, innovation is making a big difference in our world, and we need to focus in on it and understand how to do it. We've spent two different webinars in this series about this issue. One is how to spur creativity in order to get more innovation, and the second is how you run an organization that really facilitates the innovation processes you put in place. And you need to work on both of them. And increasingly, that's important because every single study that's coming out, that leaders say the most important growth area they're going to have is a function of innovation. In fact, there's an interesting study that gets done by IBM, and it's relevant to this. So, every 2 years it does a study of 1,500 plus leaders around the world, and it asks them, what are your biggest challenges? Every year that it's been doing this, with one exception, and that was 4 years ago, it came back that the biggest issue is innovation, this need to get more creativity and innovation. 4 years ago, the only time that it got bumped from that position was when people pointed to a whole new issue, which gets very close even now when innovation is number one again, but it's a very close number two, is this issue of complexity. That the decision-making process, with all the time pressures, all the information pressures, all of the global pressures, all the different organizational pressures, is requiring people to process a lot more complex information to make better decisions, and that's not easy. You can't just do incremental change. Scaling, for example, doesn't just work as a scale, because what happens is at some point you enter a new area. For an example, if I have a company of 4 people and I scale to 8, that's not generally a big problem, because under 8 people I can divide into 2 teams or something like that and be able to do it. And we're all still working together. But if I have a company of 3,000 people and I want to grow that to 30,000 people, then clearly scale alone isn't there. I need to create all kinds of new structures for communication, for prioritization, from developing trust, all of the variables that affect great leaders who want to get people to follow through and achieve the corporate mission and achieve the corporate vision. So it's not enough incremental change anymore. It's really understanding new models for how to organize us, as we discussed also earlier when we dealt with the network team model. But here's the scary part. Over half the people said they're not prepared to handle the complexity. I teach here in the United States. I teach in China. One of the issues that I'm always focusing in on is really to be able to look at all of these issues. And it isn't an issue that the traditional textbooks have. You have to really pull this out from what happens every day. Unfortunately, I'm working with a group of people right now taking a program at a major university in the United States called ethical engineering. And I keep pointing to the issue of the Volkswagen clearly tampering with the evidence of whether or not something's succeeding or not, in terms of your mileage and your pollution of your engine, is something which, when manipulated as Volkswagen did, is unethical. But what's even more unethical is reporting that it was just a lapse when they reported this information, as opposed to really going through how the organizational model allowed this to go, allowed people to hide from being able to look at it, talk about it, etc. All part of this complexity issue. So how do you handle all of this? Well, one of the answers is to really focus on these 5 A's, attributes of effective leadership, because within each one, you get the basic kernel from being able to make a difference. So we're going to focus on them, and I start with the one thing that's most central to each leader, and that's authenticity. Then we're going to talk about their ability to articulate and communicate to the leaders so they'll understand why to follow, aligning them, dealing with the culture, accountability to produce the strategic performance, and then, given the changes that are happening in this world, to be agile. So let's begin. To be authentic means being true to yourself. It means understanding what you need to do and focusing in on it, and being transparent and being consistent. I look at these 3 people, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Warren Buffett. These are 3 people, in my opinion, who represent being authentic to what they believe in. And they believe in very different things. Okay, work. For Richard Branson, work is to empower people to have fun while you're doing it. You always see him smiling into doing it. So what you need to do is understand what are the components, and it's really 4. One is it's your head focusing on the vision. Okay, where are we going? What are we trying to do? How are we going to change the world? Bill Gates had said in 1980s, we're going to put a microcomputer on every desk and have our software on every desktop. That was his vision, a world where everyone suddenly has the power of computing within their hands. Okay, the purpose was to be able to process information faster and better and make it possible for us to progress. Second issue is it's not just the rational, logical vision, but it's also about understanding that people care about it. It's their heart. So you need to energize these people. They need to feel their passion, which is where purpose comes. When you feel that you're doing every day, your engagement in your company is important to you, you're making a difference in the world, you're making a difference to yourself, you're making a difference to your colleagues, that's the purpose. And that purpose becomes one that's gone from being rational to also emotional. And so that energizes you. And with that, you can then mobilize the rest of the team and understand we work together mostly as teams. And so that's why it's a team model that we need to understand. And finally, it's your guts. It's going into you and reaching a different level. It's the level of that integration between the first two to create something like issues like courage. Okay, the ability to face fear to move forward in the face of fear, recognizing that fear isn't the stopping point. It's just something that sharpens your attention, but you go through it anyhow. It's integrity. It's being able to stick to the decisions to do the right thing, not to phony results on air emission standards and things like that. There's no integrity in being number one if you've done it wrong. And finally, it's to recognize, and this is key to leadership, and authentic leadership is to understand that at every moment you are a role model. People are looking at you and they're watching you and what you say and what you do and how you do it. So you need to walk the walk. If you do that, two things happen. They respect you, they trust you, and then they can say, this is the model for the kind of leadership I want. So it is critical both as a leader and as a role model, bringing up next gen leaders to be able to have all four parts of these things to be authentic. Once you've made that commitment to thine own self be true, you need to ask the second question, okay, within my company, what does the company need to know now? Where am I taking it? What am I doing? And this comes to the second part is understanding what I call the leverage point. What is the single most important thing that people in the company need to know? It's going to make a difference in how we run this company and make a difference. And so examples are Tom Watson says, you know what, we're going to put computing power in front of people, and he builds an organization around those products. But then Lou Gerstner, when he takes over in 1990, and everyone thinks the company is losing money and should maybe be dismantled because there's no way this company can succeed as a a company that sells computing machines in a world that's totally changing from mainframes and mini computers to now microcomputers. And as you know, today it's all wearable computers. It's a completely smaller level, etc. How do you get there? And his leverage point was to understand we don't make machines. What we do is we solve problems using computing power, and it doesn't matter what machine we have, and therefore we can constantly keep upgrading and not worrying about that and make the last year's machine obsolete this year and become better and better, such as Watson does that. And so it becomes an understanding that leadership is a theme that can change over time, but is consistent with where you want your leaders to understand the focus should be. A similar example is General Electric. Excuse me. Where Jack Welch in the 1990s took a look at this large conglomerate, 1980s, 1990s, and realized he was in lots of things, and with that, there's no focus, and people can only succeed well if they focus. It's what I call the power of five, and what he decided is the way we're going to succeed is to be either number one or two in any industry we stay in, because if we can't do that, we can't differentiate ourselves and prove our value, and we should therefore not be doing it. And that's what he did. And if you know, in 1999, when Fortune was looking for not just the man of the year, but also the man of the century, that was Jack Welch. because he had taken this company that was an okay company and turned it into the absolute world leader, highest market cap at the time. What he had done, and this is it's such an important part to today's presentation, is that he had also said, what I need to do is elevate my leaders. And so what he did is he really worked on that. He built an educational program, Hudson on Croton, and Croton on Hudson rather, and he trained people. And unlike most companies I run into that say they have no leaders or maybe just one leader for succession, he had five people absolutely capable of taking over General Electric if he needed to do it. It just became the question of what. And in this case, Jeff Inmel get that assignment, and he took it over in 2000. But what's also interesting is he understood his leadership theme was different. If Jack Welch's theme was get rid of a lot of companies and divisions of our company that aren't producing synergy and the profits and the success and the capabilities that we need to make it in the 21st century, Jeff now inherited this new structure. He needed to make it work. So his particular assignment was execution, making sure things get executed well. And as you know, he struggled through this. The stock's been basically flat for the last 15 years. And this year he's made a major change to go forward by actually getting rid of a number of different divisions, which still were distracted. So it wasn't being one or two in your industry. It was being in the synergistic industries that really is going to make the difference. And when you look at all these companies, you'll notice everybody has a slightly different leadership theme, but that's fine. So innovation, okay, in a sense, could be many different companies. General Electric has it, Watson through IBM. P&G had a major problem with its ability through R&D to produce new products. And then when Lafley came back in 2008, he totally changed the model from internal R&D to partnership R&D with other companies, especially smaller ones outside. And what he did is he brought that in, and the number of products and services produced as a result astronomically increased. He's customer centric. That's an important part for many companies that deal with B2C. Zappos being a great example of that, where the customer service is the single biggest asset that company has. It sells shoes and other products without giving you a problem delivering it. I'm sorry, returning it, because it understood that was the key to make it work. And so what's real important to understand is they focus in on that. And it's their customer service that's their greatest marketing tool. Globalization, most of these companies are there. Think of it, whether it's Starbucks or IBM, they're all in a global world and trying to figure out how to meet different needs. If you focus on companies that move in that area, one of the things they're learning is its basics, it's anthropology, it's ethnography, all kinds of tools of understanding new cultures and how to market, sell, and meet the needs of the people in the culture. It's giving out value in whatever way that makes sense. So again, for Amazon, the one-click concept became a great value again out of technology, and in many ways, Amazon is now representing one of the fastest growing companies in terms of adding new capabilities that's out there. It's the strong culture. Again, Zappos has a phenomenal culture. Starbucks has a phenomenal culture in what it's doing. Walmart clearly is figuring out how to be able to use its technology in terms of talent management and continuous improvement to be able to constantly produce something called the opportunity loop, which basically says they will work really hard at buying products at the absolute lowest price that they can and pass on increased savings to the customer. So the customers love the product so much they'll actually purchase more than they bought in the first place, and that loop has fueled their growth. And an interesting side statistic is in 1962, three companies, all in the same industry, were started: Kmart, Walmart, and Target. And until roughly 1980s, where Walmart then changed its model for greater leadership, and then just took off and is now obviously the number one retail store out there. Final part about this to deal with in the authentic is to understand what is that leverage point, what is the most important thing. And that Steve Jobs is a hero to so many of us, and I'm one of them. And there are many parts of what he says that you could quote and take, and this is authentically who he is. But the one that I like a lot because it's the kind of thing some people have a problem with. I'm one of them, by the way, is that we tend to want to do a lot of things, and that takes away our energy. Again, the General Electric problem. So he makes this point about focus is meaning saying no. The ability to say no is important. So he's as proud of things we haven't done as things we have done. And so that's what you have to do. And similarly, you need to understand that you're that role model. So it comes down to, again, your leader presence. And take Oprah, best example of doing it. She's really stood there. She's understood her sense of purpose is to be able to create great value for people, but to touch their heart and soul and be a role model and open up new doors in education. So she clarifies her values and practices them all the time. Tremendous integrity. That's how she's able to build so many businesses with just the right people who are there to be able to do what they do. Clearly, she's trustworthy. She's projecting at any time confidence and humility. Just listen to her voice, her tone, and things like that. And whatever she's working on, she exudes enthusiasm. When she started her channel, um, the OWN is just a great example of doing it. So again, the key point is to be able to be bold, but bold about the things you know will work, and do it in the right way, which is to be authentic so that you're being true to yourself. At that point, you've done your job for yourself. Now you have to understand as a leader, you have to communicate it to other people. And that means to really carefully articulate what it is you want them to know so they know why they're being led. Again, the why comes first, as Simon Sinek says. The what, the how follows from there. So again, the vision is how will this company change the world? What's going to be different about the world as a result of that? So for Starbucks, their vision initially in being a retail store offering great coffee and a nice atmosphere was to create a third place. That was their vision. We have a third place in the world where people can relax and enjoy their coffee and have a good quality. One is at home, one is at work, and one is a new place called Starbucks. The missions, what do I do to impact on customers? How do I make a difference? And so knowing I get up at 4 in the morning to go make the coffee when I get to the office at 5:45, so we have absolutely fresh coffee that's changed every hour, if not more often, um, for, um, for our customers is a critical part of it. What are the values? What do we stand for? It's critical that everyone in the company knows that. One of the great things that Howard Schultz did when he took over the company again in the 2008-9 era is he realized the key values he had initially instilled were being lost. And so he wanted to make sure the values were one of we earn our money by providing high quality and high customer service. And he actually closed all of his companies down for a day so we could spend that whole day in service training everyone. And it's an amazing thing. Many of us don't remember that happened, but it did, and it made all the difference. And you take a look at how Starbucks continues to grow and continues to outperform. So understand what are the goals that you stand for, the values you stand for. And finally, what do we have to accomplish now? What are our goals today? And so you have long-term goals, intermediate goals, short-term goals. How do they link all together? How do we measure our performance? And how do we take where we're going to make the next thing? You need to articulate all of these pieces, or else they can't follow you. So part of it is to understand how we communicate. So Neurolinguistic programming, NLP, focuses on three different communication systems we use to communicate and to connect. One is visual, I see your point. Okay, the second might be auditory, I hear you. And the third one is kinesthetic, I'm touching you, I feel your pain. The key is for each of us to understand two things. One is what's our preference in communicating, and second one is the audience, the person we're speaking to, because you want to try to resonate with that person with theirs. That'll work on it. President Gerald Ford made the point, nothing's more important than the ability to communicate effectively, and I really think he got it. That's really such an important part of what we have to do. And the third part on this part again is remembering we're always communicating. Communication is an ongoing process where everybody is doing it at all time, and it's done through many different medium and many different approaches to doing that. So what you're always doing is not just saying what you're doing, but it's how you say it, it's the format, it's the content, etc. For those of you who remember, In today's presentation, our parent company is Presentation Excellence Group, which came from Presentation Excellence, which was a successor to a company called Brilliant Image, which had over 5,000 senior executives, mostly in the United States, but worldwide, who learned how to communicate effectively to close gigantic deals that made big differences in people's lives. And it's by dealing with all of these issues. The key is to always understand, again, that's not just what you say and how you say it, but how you act about it. Because, again, as a leader, you're a role model, and you need to be able to show people you're walking the walk and generating trust. Third part's to recognize, again, we don't do things ourselves. The world of the Lone Ranger is gone. What we're all about today is really building teams, aligning the team, keeping that team energized, keeping them focused, and making sure that all the techniques we're talking about are working within our short teams and our larger teams. So you want to keep people focused on the purpose. It's critical people know why. It's a shame when you think about so many people in the HR industry in America focus on our big problems of engagement. How do we keep employees engaged and everything? And yet, if you think about it, there's some terrible organizations, Al Qaeda, ISIS, that have figured that out because what they've done is they've done such a great job of getting into people's hearts and minds that unfortunately, for their purposes, which are not good, but for their purposes, they've done this wrong. They've got people willing to die for their companies. We want our people to be engaged in doing the positive thing and feel the same way. And we have that in many areas. When we don't, that's because we really haven't clarified what is the emotional long-term value that comes from our purpose. And so you need to hire the right people. You need to train them. You need to encourage them. You need to mobilize them and let them feel the sense of community and let them feel that it's making a difference in their lives. The key part, therefore, in aligning a team is not just to give lip service to everything, but to focus on really building a strong culture. It is those behaviors, it is the values, it's the norms that are in there. And every company goes through it in different ways. Building a powerful culture is so important, and it isn't something people write down and post on a wall. It's something that they know intrinsically in terms of what they do. For those of you who have followed the work I do with Evaluate to Win, eval, EVAL, the number 2, WIN.com is where you can actually see it. It's the importance of companies who really want to do greater performance is to focus on these three issues. One is aligned to the culture. Is everyone aligned, and how do we get better alignment? Two is strategic performance. Is everyone doing their job in a way that fosters the growth of performance by the team and by the company? And finally, leadership, which is our creed part of putting it all together and being able to help followers follow in the right direction. And you've got to work on all of this, and that's the critical part in making it work for everybody. And you need to link them. So again, everyone needs to fully understand why they're doing what they're doing, how they should be doing it, and what is their unique contribution. The lack of engagement comes when they don't feel what they're doing is necessarily producing a result at the very end that you would want to have. And so it's every day you need to reinforce these kinds of issues about culture and performance. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. What's real important to understand also is that it isn't a one-time event. It's a long-term process. So you're empowering people for sustainability. In many ways, we are that orchestra leader, and all of the players around us are playing beautiful instruments. And we need to make sure that all of those instruments, or in this case, systems, are there. So what we need to do is build the right organizational structures, which is why, if you've been paying attention to the webinar series we've been doing, we've been dealing with these issues. What is it for organizational structures we can use? What are the systems that we can use to be able to do our job better? What kind of technologies will make sense? Technology for technology's sake isn't an answer, but for culture, for performance, for strategy, it is. Team building, how do we do that well? How do we help people handle stress, as we covered in an early presentation? And understanding very much so, what are the cultural values? I've just had a client that's gone through a major change and realized the key value that they had has changed, and we're now planning what we call an SLA, strategic leadership advance, because we don't believe in management retreating. Management's always advancing, but they're leaders in that case because they're looking at where they're going. And we're going through that because we're going to redefine the values and the rewards for that company. Fourth part, as I said, is to hold people accountable for that strategy. For the strategy part, you want to really hold people accountable, and for all of the other parts as well. So, eval to win, which is part of evaluate to win, is a process by which every dyad in a company, meaning a boss and their subordinate, work on the job description of the subordinate, and they may agree on what needs to be done to get the job done, to be part of a great culture, what can be done to improve both of them, because the key value is continuous improvement, and to be able to encourage people to be able to do it more and more and more. So the performance system is not one of an annual review, which is one directional, but it's a review that can take place at any point you've chosen, every month, every quarter, every half year, every year, but it's looking at this final goal of continuous improvement. Do we understand what we're doing? Do we understand how we have to change what we're doing so performance and culture gets better? It's a phenomenal system. Val to win. You can look up etw.com is actually the parent who's really built this. And right now, Jack Welch is actually a senior partner in this new product because it's a phenomenal tool that people can use. The system allows you to then ask questions like, how are we doing it? And we know that by looking at decision dashboards. What are we doing? Forward thinking, where will it go? You always want to have objective feedback so you know what's going to make a difference and where it's going to go. You want to involve all your relevant stakeholders. I was just reading today about the CEO of Kraft talking about activist investors and how they're making a difference in her life. And that's again the point. They are stakeholders and they're taking more active than they've been before because they may want changes in what's taking place in whatever company, Kraft being one of them. Actually, it's not Kraft, it's I'm blanking on the name with an M. Anyhow, the second part is that when supervisors and employees go through the issues, okay, what are we doing? How do we do it? How do we change it? The focus is to be carefrontational, not confrontational, meaning to focus on how do I help you do your job better. That is the obligation of the boss, the supervisor, to help the employee, the subordinate figure out how they can improve personally, again, for the team and for the company, and then constantly feed that back. And so as people change jobs or become new to a company, they should be reviewed on a much more frequent basis than these semi-annual processes or even annual processes. And the final part that I mentioned is to be agile. In this day and age, with things changing as quickly as they are, we can't sit back and wait for yearly reviews and things like that. Things are changing very, very quickly, and so we need to respond to shifting priorities as fast as possible for everyone's benefit. And so the philosophy or the psychology behind this really is to do whatever it takes to get where you need to go. And that means being attuned to what changes are going to be needed. Excuse me. What does that mean? That means facing reality and being able to make changes. It's not easy to run a company, but in a world that's changing and things change, you need to be the first person to say, well, you need to make a change. And when you do it, you need to have the courage of your convictions and the courage of understanding you need to make the change, and your willingness to confront it and have confidence in your own capabilities is critical to getting the followers to follow in what you're doing. I think Ken Chanel really says it really nicely that you don't follow a book, a manual, and that's how you're going to manage something. What you're not doing is managing, you're leading. You're leading really by these values and beliefs. You're using them to help people reinforce their own perception of what's right and wrong and move forward from there. Again, each person has to be authentic into themselves. And so, as Steve Jobs was, you need to be able to have the courage of your own convictions and be true to yourself. This is another great quote. He gave this actually at a commencement address, and I think it's a great one. I'm going to repeat it because I love this one so much because it's true for everyone. Your time is limited. Don't waste time. Don't waste it living someone else's life. And I work with interns all the time and trying to make sure that they choose the career and the life they want and not following someone else's dreams. Have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition and not just where you think you're going to make the money. And then what will happen is somehow when you listen to that heart and intuition, he says, it helps you find out what you truly want to become. And if you think about it, Steve actually went through ashrams and dropped out of school and everything to search, find himself, followed his heart, followed his intuition, and changed 4 industries. I mean, not many people could say they made that kind of massive change. In sum, when you put it all together, what do you get? You're going to need to be authentic to walk the walk and inspire the vision. You have to articulate communically. You have to communicate clearly and often. Excuse me. You have to be align everyone in the organization. Otherwise, you've got silos and you're all pulling in opposite directions. You hold everyone accountable. You assess performance, but the goal isn't to just do a job, it's to continuously improve. So what new value, what new skills do you need next year to be able to do your job better? And finally, to be agile, to be able to make changes as you need to do it. So if you follow those rules in terms of what you're looking for your leaders, you're able now to go take your next gen leaders and move them into the status of being the leaders who really will rule your company in the next years. Now, how do we do that? Number one answer is you have to engage them in something we call deliberate practice. We're increasingly learning that you can take the time and identify your next gen leaders and you can fast track them. But if you just give them book learning, okay, let them watch videos and things like that, it's all intellectual. The best way to get people involved is to actually give them a chance to act it out. So they're in a leadership situation and watch how they handle it, whether it's actual or simulation. Both work. Croton used to, again, GE used to use simulations as well. The key part here is for them to practice and learn and share information with other people and get the diversity of perspectives to be able to see where am I missing something and what am I doing right. Vistage, as you know, is a company I work with. It's 20,000 CEOs in the United States and 15 other countries that provides these CEOs who run companies generally between $5 million and $500 million with the ability to grow faster. Dun& Bradstreet finds new companies grow at 3 times the rate of traditional companies that aren't Vistage members. So it's a great process of doing this. And they've incorporated in the last 3 years a new leadership development program working with the executive team, very often consisting of current leaders and next gen leaders and giving them that chance to work with a partner and be accountable and be aligned around the culture, but also getting the information they need and the diversity of perspectives so that they're not falling into silos and basically going through a deliberate practice program where they're learning everything they need to know about running a company and being able to do it well. And the companies that have used what's called Vistage Inside, and if you're in New York, I can actually talk to you about it, provide it, because I offer it to companies here in New York. It's an